Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Siblington, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about. This week, we're joined by Deb Gallo, Learning and Development Director at SentinelOne. We discuss the highlights and challenges of scaling L&D in a high-growth organization. Deb shares fantastic advice on a wide range of topics, from managing the changing requirements of a fast-growing business to bringing a company culture to life. The episode is packed with expert insight that you certainly don't want to miss. So sit back and enjoy. Deb, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Nelson. It's great to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
I'm super excited to have this chat, especially because we're going to dive into a topic that's close to me, which is the idea of how do you scale L&D in a high growth organization, right? I thought a good place to start is maybe to understand at what point do you make your first L&D hire, right? When's a good time to bring someone in and to start thinking about L&D?
Good question. I'm biased, of course. That's as soon as possible. Get them in early. But, it's, I do think the sooner the better. I mean, learning will be happening in the organization. There'll be learning happening. The sooner you get someone in who can help scaffold, structure, build it out, the better. And the more impact it will have. So the sooner the better.
And typically when you've joined, when's that roughly the point? Like which employee number are you when you join?
Good question. I've had a variety of experiences. So in the last couple of years, I was employee number 60 at a very small fintech startup. I came in and the focus was building out the learning academies, which at that stage I was like, oh, wow, they're so small and already thinking about this, which was great, which means you have access to everyone in the organization, the CEO, the C-suite, everyone, you have instant access. So that was great. The other spectrum, I came into a 6,000 person, couple of years post IPO, huge global company, second person in L&D. And at that point I was like, wow, okay, this is a little bit late in the game. So that was challenging because at that point, you need to do a lot of work in terms of raising awareness of just what L&D brings to the business. People have been sort of getting on with things for so long that they're like, L&D, like, why do we need that now? So there's a lot of influencing work that you need to do at that point. And in my current role, we're at 1,000 people. I came in a couple of months pre-IPO. So there was a hunger, there was a need, and there was a lot of fires to put out as well. So it was a mix of good timing, but also a lot of work sort of getting things set up. So I've been a bit on all sides of the spectrum.
You know what, that's super interesting because do you find one harder than the other? Like, as in, is it more difficult to change learned behaviors? Like, this company's existed for years without L&D, and so you're completely trying to rebrand and change the way things are done? Or is it better to start with a blank slate, right? Where you're starting from scratch and you can kind of set the tone for what it is?
It's such a good question because I'm thinking back to that point where I came in at 6,000 sort of people mark, and it was more of me adapting to the organization. So it was challenging for me having to change my mindset in terms of, okay, there's a whole lot of things that have been working really well that I don't want to just sort of wipe clean. So how do I build on that? How do I maximize that while also introducing sort of other things that are going to help sort of scale learning and really create an impact? Coming into a blank slate, I'm a big picture thinker. I'm like sort of ideas. So for me, the challenge is, okay, scale back, go slow, can't do everything at once. So that's also challenging. So yeah, they both have their pros and cons.
And have you always reported into HR, or have you reported it into different parts of the business?
Yeah, good question. In the small startup that I had started, I started reporting into the COO and then moved into HR. So I have for most of my career, I've sort of always been within HR. Yeah.
Right. So I guess coming to the kind of high growth and scaling L&D, what are some of the kind of top challenges you face trying to do that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of scaling L&D, the challenges that I'm facing right now, so some of the challenges that I'm facing now is starting to think about, okay, the organization is growing really quickly. And that means that sort of sales are accelerating, the sales org is accelerating, it's growing. We've got an engineering team that's also sort of growing massively. And I need to really hurry up and figure out what structure do I need for a learning team to be able to support and also anticipate where the business is going, so that I can already be sort of ahead of the curve a little bit. So I start figuring out, okay, if HR is structuring like this and sales is like this, and okay, how do I start thinking about my team? So that's the one bit. The other challenge is there's so many priorities, and so you need to think about, okay, what's going to make the most impact, and what can I do scrappy? What can I sort of just get it out there? What's going to take a little bit more time, and where do I need to bring in some structure, which in sometimes it's a little bit like, ooh, that's like the word that you can't say, but it's like, okay, I need to bring that in order to be able to scale sort of learning. So yeah, those are the challenges that mainly that I'm having right now.
And what's your process there in terms of, figuring out all of the priorities, then actually prioritizing those things? What's the process in figuring that out?
Yeah, it's a lot of talking to people and a lot of talking to a lot of people. So I think when I came into my current role, the first month I just spent talking, listening, getting to know the business, getting to know the leaders, getting an idea of, okay, what are the main themes that are coming out? What are the main pain points? Are there sort of synergies? Are there parallels around what everyone is feeling, what everyone think they need? And then figuring out, okay, so this is what I'm hearing. This is what I know where the business is going. Okay, what's going to make the most impact, and what's going to help the business move forward even quicker. So for me, it's talking, listening, the connections, making connections. I think in L&D, you need to be a connector. And sometimes you find yourself being that connector because everyone knows you, comes to you, and you're hearing things from all over the place. So it's being able to make those connections is really key.
And how do you kind of stay ahead when, imagine the requirements when you're at 20, 50, 100, 200, 500 changes, right? And so you've just kind of figured out what the priorities and what the structure is for a 100-person company.
Yeah.
But, in the next few months, you might all end up being a 200-person or 300-person company. Yeah. So what's your process for making sure you're always staying on top of the kind of changing requirements, maybe even whether you need to change the structure, whether you need to go back to the starting point and go again?
Yeah, I think my golden rules is don't hold on to anything too tightly. So don't become enamored with a structure, with a program, with anything that you hold on to it so tightly that you lose sight of where the business is going, and then you're left behind. So being flexible, being able to pivot quickly is key, and knowing that what I'm building right now may not look like this in 6 months' time, in a year's time, and it will change and evolve, and that's okay. Coupled with that, with that mindset, then what you're creating and what you're producing, you're not striving for perfection. You're striving for, okay, minimum viable product. Let's get things out there, and that then sort of evolves and you need to pivot. It's hard keeping ahead of the curve, and I think that's why the relationships and the connections are key, because you probably will never be able to be ahead, but you'll be in the loop, and you'll be able to, support, to follow through, to react quicker than not. So those connections are really key.
And Deb, it's interesting you mentioned kind of minimum viable products, right? Obviously, we hear a lot of this being in tech and product development. Yeah. At what point did you start kind of adopting this idea within the work you do within L&D? Because it still is very rare. A lot of the work we see done within L&D is still very much the kind of big bang programs and large batch thinking. So maybe talk to me about at what point you adopted that idea and how that's changed your approach to L&D.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. Was there a moment in time? I think I can't remember of a moment, but I can remember a feeling of frustration, of having worked on something for so long and building it up, and then getting to the point where you're ready and it's already like, well, yeah, it's not quite, we've moved on, or yeah, it's great, but this is what we need now. And you're like, oh my God, I just spent so much time sort of getting that perfect. So there's that feeling is very real. Like, okay, I need to be moving quickly. And even I'm working on a project right now that is just the requirements are just changing as they go. And I'm thinking, okay, this is what I'm hearing this week. Okay, I got to prepare for it next week, and just being nimble enough. I think once you go through that pain of realizing, oh gosh, I'm actually falling behind, I'm not keeping up, then you instantly, it's a mindset change of thinking, okay, I need to just get things out. And what was challenging for me was the whole scrappiness, just being scrappy. I'm like, yeah, I'm not too sure about scrappy. But then what was eye-opening for me was that it was meeting the need. It was like, okay, so this, program, from a sort of perfectionist view, or my old sort of view, is that it wasn't very polished, but it was just exactly what my sort of teams needed. It met the need, it sort of hit the mark, and I was like, okay, well, if that works, then let's keep going down that way. So yeah.
How did you overcome one of the most common objections we hear when we recommend taking more of a lean approach, using the minimum viable product? And one of the common objections we hear from L&D professionals is this kind of fear of failure, really, right? There's this, I guess, this false sense of comfort you get from spending a lot of time having loads of layers of sign off, where you think when you push it out, it's going to be perfect, it's going to land just right. Obviously, we know retrospectively that's not always the case, but it's almost with an MVP, it seems like the risks of going wrong. How did you overcome that objection?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like walking the talk, right? We talk about not having a fear of failure, learning from failings as part of a learning process, and that's how we learn. And it's funny that as learning professionals, we don't do that with our own sort of products. We're like, well, I need to walk the talk. And if I'm advocating for this type of learning, then I need to demonstrate that I'm also sort of learning with what I'm producing and what I'm going out there with. And that's just fine. And it's also the framing up front of how you frame what you're doing with your stakeholder. We need to move quick. We need to just become comfortable with failing and use that as, well, that's a learning. That's actually really useful, because if I fail, then my next program, my next initiative is going to be even better. So bring it on. I'm like,
yeah. And what about, you mentioned around what works, what doesn't work, and then the MVP kind of helps you learn that faster. What does working mean for you, right? How do you know something is working and as a result know what's not working?
Yeah, good question. I think when I think about something that's working, when it comes to the type of programs and the type of work that I do, it's a shift in behavior. I mean, if there's a shift in behavior, even if it's a minimal shift, then it's on the right track and it's working. If there's a shift in mindset, there's a shift in what people are doing, how they're doing it, then okay, it's working. If there is no shift and it's just a purely, that was great fun, then I'm like, okay, I'm not sure that's what the business really needs. Great that that it had that outcome, but I look for those shifts in behavior.
And how do you measure that, Deb? What's the thinking around it? Because one of the common things I'm sure you're aware of is there's a lot of measuring of completion rates, etc. Typically because people find it's the easiest way for them to show some kind of, I guess I wouldn't even call it impact, but they at least know people are engaging with it. But measuring behavior change is obviously a lot more of a challenge. How do you approach that?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, and I don't have the answer for that one. I'm sorry. I'm still testing it out and seeing what works. But I mean, you need to be very clear up front with, okay, what is the change that we're looking for? Who's going to be accountable for that, for those measurements after the event or the program? Stating that up front, and then having your stakeholders on board to follow through, because it can't all land on L&D. It's just not doable. So it's having the right partnerships with the people involved, the people who are learning, the managers, other people I think it's a it's a team effort. And it also depends on sort of what the behavior is, the priority of that behavior. So you would then look at, okay, who do you pull in, at what point, and how accountable do you make them? So it takes a lot of influencing and good relationships with people.
And given the whole kind of hybrid environment now, Deb, what have you seen works and doesn't work for you in terms of delivering learning to such a different, it's a new challenge, right? I think we're seeing a lot of organizations going from classroom to overnight. You've now got to find a way of dealing with distributed teams in different environments. So what have you found works for you?
Yeah, look, I think I kind of see it as different, different experiences, the in-person experience, the hybrid experience, and then you've got the virtual experience. So the way I see them is in person is everyone's co-located, everyone's in the same space physically. We have that down pat. We know sort of what works in that space. I think what's new-ish is the virtual is not new. I mean, it's been around for a long time. I think we've gotten better at it over the last 2 years. And the learnings for me around virtual learning, where we're all virtual, is just that the importance of connection before content. So initially there was a lot of, okay, let's just convert what we're doing. We had this 2-day program. Okay, let's just shorten it, convert it into Zoom, and it'll be fine. And quickly we realized, okay, no, that doesn't work. So there was a process of thinking through, okay, how do we connect people in the virtual environment? How do we create those deep connections, which you can do in very short sort of amounts of time? So it's definitely doable, but how do we kick off with that, create an environment where there is that connection, and then give them just enough content, as much, just not overdoing it in terms of the content. So that's kind of the thinking around that. For virtual, we launched an onboarding. So we've got sort of global team. And what I was looking at is, okay, I need to create a connection to our culture, and I need to create a connection within our new hires, within the group, and also a connection to our leaders. So I said, okay, how do I sort of architect that? And the way we did it is with facilitated discussions. So again, something that we learned is that just sending people off into a breakout to sort of talk about A or B, it works to a certain point, but you need to sort of be more intentional about what it is that you're getting those people to do. So we've got facilitated conversations with a platform that guides them through some scenarios, some conversation points, and in a fun, interactive way. And then we designed a custom escape room, which is around catching a hacker. So we said, okay, well, we work in cybersecurity. How do we bring in a bit of the what we do in a fun way to engage people from the beginning? So using tech in a way that sort of engages. The last piece, the hybrid part, where you've got people online and you've got people in person, I think is going to be the most challenging, because that will really requires a lot more intentional design of the learning experience. And you also need a lot more scaffolding. So if you've got people online, you need someone ideally who's managing and facilitating the interactions and the dynamics that are happening online, someone who's also co-facilitating the in-person experience, and then you're sort of bringing that together. So it is challenging. It's doable, definitely. And I hope that we get better and better at it, because I do see that that's going to become more and more common.
And what's your kind of decision-making workflow, Deb, for do you go synchronous? Do you go asynchronous? Because I imagine, especially with distributed teams, people are working possibly on different time zones. And obviously it's a huge time commitment. And in high growth companies, the most common thing we hear is, everyone's time poor, everyone's busy, right? And therefore synchronous is a time commitment from the employee. So what's your kind of decision-making process for which one to use?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got a kind of a decision process, but there are things that I evaluate and I look at. So I think one of the things that has come up as an important point to think about is the past experience and the expectations of the learners. So I've been sort of training groups that have had most of their learning in person. So shifting that to virtual is more than just saying, hey, we're doing a virtual session, but there's a whole mindset shift and influencing that we need to do. Now, once you get them across the line, then okay, that's it. But that takes a lot of work. So I take that into account. And also then the logistics of, geographies and time zones and things like that. I've delivered programs and I've proved that virtual works. You can go deep, you can create connections, you can learn, people can connect, it can work, but there needs to be a readiness to do that. So a couple of things to dig into before you dive in.
How do you prepare that readiness, Deb? I know it's probably a big question, but what are some of the little things that you've maybe done, that you found works for you?
Yeah. I mean, word of mouth works, like the good old-fashioned word of mouth, running a program that goes really well. You get a couple of people to experience it. Hopefully you have a few of the skeptics in that group as well. And then once they realize, oh, actually, that was a lot more impactful than what I thought. And then word starts getting out. So it's a little bit of influencing and getting that word of mouth out works wonders, especially when you have groups that are in person, they're talking, things are happening. Allowing that sort of to spread is really powerful. So simple, old-fashioned, but it works.
I like it. And what about in terms of creating content and curating content, right? At what point, it sounds amazing. The idea of a virtual escape room to find a hacker sounds awesome. At one point, do you make that decision though? Like, and for which, I guess, needs do you think creating your own content that is on brand makes sense? And when doesn't it make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, it's which are the moments in the employee experience that have the biggest impact on a person's engagement, on their sort of views of longevity within the company. And when you sort of start looking at that, the starting point is key. So onboarding, and there's a lot of data out there that points a really strong, impactful onboarding really paves the road for a successful sort of engaged employee. So I think putting the time and effort and resources into a really impactful onboarding is key. So that would be one. The other one is, for me, leadership. I think leaders and managers have an enormous ripple effect within the organization. So getting that right, the payoffs they just multiply because it has that effect. So that would be the other instance. Yeah.
All right.
And the other one, I guess the last one is culture, which we haven't sort of touched upon, but when you've got culture as one of your pillars, one of the focus areas for L&D, that's also important. And especially if it's an organization that is culture-led, that's going to be key because that's what you want to, one of your, I guess, the objectives is to embed, to scale that culture. So you do need to put sort of the required resources into that.
And let's talk about that part, Deb, because scaling culture is one of the many challenges of a high growth organization. And so how do you think L&D can play a critical role in helping scale that culture?
Yeah, I think L&D plays a huge role. And first of all, because of the contact points that L&D has. I mean, if you map out the employee sort of journey, L&D comes in at some really critical points, onboarding, sort of transitions, leader development, all those points where culture is really central to that. Yes. So I think for L&D to take that into account, to embed and to weave that into the learning is a no-brainer, is key. The other, I guess, side to that is having culture as a key focus, which I haven't had. I mean, at Netflix, it was the sole focus of learning was culture, and that I hadn't experienced that before to that degree. And in that sense, L&D, again, you have the scope is huge because it covers everyone, and it's key to everyone's role. So I think I really loved that L&D could play such a central role in something that touched sort of everyone. So that was really great.
And just on that, given your experience at Netflix where culture was so central, how do you make sure culture is not one of those things where, it's printed on the walls, stuck up, we say this is our culture and these are our values, but how do you turn it into something that is actually put into practice and people really see it, experience it as almost quite a visceral, tangible thing?
Yeah. I mean, you need to be intentional about it. And also I think I keep going back to sort of mapping things out, but really ensuring that it's a central, intentional part of key moments,
Right.
and then engineering that. So I know that we talk about culture as something that you can't engineer, that it develops, that it just is, but you can create some scaffolding or some support for people to be able to unpack the culture, to be able to understand it, to be able to talk about it, to have forums to talk about it. That coupled with role modeling is key. So ensuring that you're being explicit about having to role model and to really live the culture from the very beginning, even from before, through the interview process is
Right.
key. So there's a couple of things there that you really have to work at, and it's a constant working at it.
Have you got examples of how this can be implemented well, or where you've seen it implemented well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the past, we've run some really successful culture conversation sessions. So very simple. We would choose one aspect or one element of our culture to talk about in small groups, with a leader coming in to, story tell, share their examples. And it was very simple, but people loved it, because especially new people coming into the organization, just having a forum where they could just hear, listen, ask questions, debate, sort of unpack. It was like, oh, okay, we're actually talking about it, and then going out and sort of putting it into practice, and then maybe coming back and then talking about that. So that was really powerful.
Oh, I think we might try that. Culture conversations. I like it. Deb, I could carry on going, but we've now got to the quick fire round. I'm going to fire some questions at you, and you can give me a relatively quick answer.
Okay, let's see how I go.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
What excites you about L&D?
Yeah, what excites me? I think definitely the trajectory that we have ahead. I mean, with things changing so rapidly, with ways of working and the great resignation and everything that's happening, it's just such a big opportunity for L&D to step up, and that's super exciting.
What's the one skill that you think is critical for L&D today?
Listening and asking questions.
Right, I like it. What's the one thing you've learned from someone you've worked with before?
Yeah, I had to think about this. Upwards feedback is really powerful. So I had a manager that I gave some upward feedback to, and it just strengthened a relationship, and it made me think, wow, I really should have done this ages ago. So definitely something that I took with me.
It's definitely a skill, and a skill that I appreciate.
It's hard.
When you see it done well. Yeah. And I guess it comes back to, psychological safety in the organization. You be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
What are you most proud of?
Yeah, I've had an amazing last couple of years, just so many experiences. And I think that coupled with building a family, moving to a new country, for me, the last 4 years have just been amazing. So when I look back, I'm like, yeah, those last 4 years I did pretty well. So pretty proud of myself.
What's your favorite productivity hack?
Yes, this one. I absolutely love a little product called Tabs Outliner, and I'll send you the link. It is amazing, but I have a million tabs open. This saves my tabs. I can group them, and then I can just open them up in the morning, and I've got everything nice and sorted. I don't need to freak out when my laptop crashes. So I love it.
That is music to my ears. I've tried so many different ways. Do you think it's a habit you can shake off? But it's a struggle. I think anyone who has multiple tabs knows that feeling when your laptop all of a sudden goes AWOL and closes on you.
Yeah. And it's so beautiful when I open this up and it says it has all my crash tabs. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Awesome. And the last one for you, Deb. What's your biggest personal learning?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it before. Being a parent for me is the ultimate learning on the job. It's the ultimate. You don't get a manual, you don't get a course. You can go to courses, but there's nothing like the experiential learning on the job. And for me, it's been just, mind blowing. Learning about myself and my kids.
What other skills you think picked up? Transferable
so many
skills, actually.
Yes, listening, influencing, de-escalating, managing conflict. Oh, so many. Yeah, and I'm sure, and my kids are, my oldest is 4.5, so I've got years of learning.
All the best with the parenting.
Awesome.
And thank you very much for your time. It's been amazing.
Cool. Thanks, Nelson. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Deb, for that brilliant conversation. I mentioned it was a topic that I'm interested in, and it certainly didn't disappoint. I completely agree with Deb's approach to flexibility and can say from experience that it pays to be prepared for change. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, then please do subscribe or tell a colleague. And if you'd like to connect with myself or Deb, our details are in the show notes.